I never believed in premonitions. You know, those strange tingles at the back of your neck or that sudden weight in your chest when everything seems to be going according to plan. For a truck driver, intuition usually means knowing the rig ahead is about to blow a tire, or realizing you need to use engine braking instead of the pedal on an icy downgrade. But that night, when I turned onto a dirt road deep inside Ashley National Forest in Utah, every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stop. Turn around. Leave. It was around 1:30 in the morning. My original route ran along Highway 191, but dispatch had sent over an urgent load with a generous bonus attached. I had to deliver a water filtration system to a remote ranger station. They were preparing for the season, and the equipment had to be there before sunrise. I accepted because the money was good, and the detour didn't seem like much. The road drained every ounce of energy out of me. It was a narrow forest trail covered in loose gravel. Ancient pine branches scraped against the sides of my trailer, making a sound like fingernails dragged across a chalkboard. My headlights cut through nothing but tree trunks and thick rolling fog. The radio had died long ago, leaving only the endless hiss of static. When I finally pulled into the small clearing where the ranger cabin stood, the silence was completely dead. The engine of my Peterbilt rumbled through the darkness, disturbing the stillness of that place, and it felt like the sound echoed for miles. I shut the truck off. The silence crashed down on me like a slab of concrete. The cabin was dark. Not a single light in the windows. No vehicles parked outside. Just an ordinary wooden building with a wide porch swallowed by the shadows of towering trees. I grabbed my flashlight, the delivery paperwork, and climbed down from the cab. The freezing mountain air burned my lungs. According to the instructions, I was supposed to leave the boxes inside. Dispatch had told me the back door would be unlocked. I walked around the cabin, sweeping my flashlight across the log walls. Dry branches snapped beneath my boots, every step sounding unnaturally loud. The back door gave way the moment I pressed the handle. It opened with a long, drawn-out creak. Inside, the air smelled like old wood, dust, and pine needles. I moved through a narrow hallway into the main room, which looked like it served as both a kitchen and a common area. My flashlight drifted across old furniture, faded wildfire safety posters, and a filthy stove. I placed the paperwork on the table. All I had to do was sign off on the delivery, leave a copy behind, and head back for the boxes. Then my eyes caught a large corkboard hanging above the kitchen table. It was covered in photographs. Normal ranger stuff. Someone holding up a fish they'd caught. Smiling faces in front of mountains. Group photos around campfires. I stepped closer out of simple curiosity, hoping that looking at ordinary people might calm my nerves. But the longer I stared, the stronger the feeling became that something was wrong. The photos were old. Yellowed edges. Faded colors. But right in the center of the board, pinned there with a fresh, shiny thumbtack, was one photograph that looked brand new. Bright. Sharp. I lifted my flashlight toward it, and my heart skipped a beat. The photograph showed my truck. It was parked exactly where I had left it 5 minutes earlier. The angle came from somewhere inside the tree line directly across from the cabin. I could clearly make out the license plate on my rig and the glowing amber marker lights. But that was impossible. I had just arrived. There was nobody around. I would have noticed a flash or movement. With trembling fingers, I reached for the photo. Folded beneath it was a sheet of paper. A standard delivery form, almost identical to the one I had just set on the table. I unfolded it. Most of it was printed boilerplate text, but the blank fields had been filled in by hand in neat, technical handwriting. Delivery of personal belongings. Driver, Michael Thompson. My name. I looked farther down the page to the deadline section. It read, "Date of death, in 2 hours." I read it 3 times. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. Was this some sick joke? Another driver messing with me? But nobody knew I was coming out here except dispatch. And how had they taken the photo? I spun around, shining my flashlight into every corner of the room. Nobody. Only crushing silence. I checked my watch. 1:38 a.m. In 2 hours. That meant 3:38. Panic slammed into me all at once. I threw the paper onto the table, turned, and bolted for the exit. I didn't even bother closing the door behind me. I just wanted to get back into my cab, fire up the engine, and get the hell out of there. Forget the boxes. Forget the filters. I jumped into the cab, slammed the door shut, and hit the lock button. My shaking hands jammed the key into the ignition. I turned it. A dry click. Nothing else. The engine didn't start. The dashboard didn't even light up. The batteries were dead. That couldn't be possible. They were brand new, and I'd been driving for hours. The alternator had been working perfectly. I tried again. And again. Nothing. Only the mocking clicks of the starter. I grabbed the CB radio. "Breaker breaker, anybody on channel? This is Mike. I need assistance out in Ashley." Only white static answered me. I checked my phone. No signal. Not even one bar. I sat there inside the locked cab in the middle of a pitch-black forest. The clock read 1:50. Then I heard it. A sound from outside. Not branches moving in the wind. Footsteps. Slow. Rhythmic footsteps crunching across gravel. Someone was circling my truck. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. I held my breath, pressing myself into the seat. The side mirrors showed nothing but darkness. The footsteps moved toward the back of the trailer. Then came the metallic scrape of someone undoing the trailer door latches. I couldn't do anything. I had a crowbar under the seat, but stepping outside meant facing whoever had planned all this. Whoever knew my name. Whoever had cut my power. The scraping stopped. The footsteps returned. Now they were moving along the driver's side. I slowly slid lower in the seat, hiding beneath the dashboard. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I waited for a bang against the window. A scream. Anything. Instead, I heard a soft scratching sound. Someone was dragging something metallic up and down my door. Up. Down. Up. Down. I looked at the clock. 2:15. Time was slipping away. The scratching stopped. The footsteps began retreating toward the cabin. Carefully, I peeked through the window. In the darkness, I could only make out a silhouette. Tall. Unnaturally thin. Dressed in black. The figure climbed the cabin steps, opened the door, and disappeared inside. He was waiting for me in there. My mind raced for a way out. I couldn't stay in the cab forever. If he came back with something heavy, the glass wouldn't save me. And sitting there waiting for 3:38 was unbearable. Then I remembered the spare battery I kept for the sleeper refrigerator. If I could reroute the wiring. But to do that, I'd have to open the hood. Go outside. At 2:40, I made my decision. Slowly, I unlocked the door. It opened almost silently. I slipped into the freezing night with the crowbar clenched in my hand. I crept toward the hood. Every movement felt endless. I released the hood latches and lifted the heavy fiberglass shell. Using a small pocket flashlight, I shined the beam onto the engine. What I saw turned my blood cold. The cables running from the batteries to the starter hadn't simply been disconnected. They had been professionally cut. And not only cut, sections of the cables were missing completely. Someone had taken them. This wasn't an accident. I had been trapped here on purpose. Then, from the direction of the cabin, I heard music. An old distorted melody playing through what sounded like a cheap radio. It was quiet, but in the dead forest night it sounded deafening. I checked my watch. 3:10. Less than 30 minutes left. I realized I would never fix the truck in time. My only chance was to run back down the road into the darkness and hope he couldn't catch me. Hope he'd lose my trail. Slowly, I backed away from the truck. That's when I heard the voice. It came from the open cabin door. Michael. The voice was calm. Normal. No demonic growl. No screaming. Just a man calling my name like we were old friends. Michael, come inside. It's time to sign for the delivery. I turned and ran. I ran down that gravel road faster than I'd ever run in my life. I didn't turn on my flashlight because I was terrified of becoming an easy target. I stumbled, fell, tore my knees open on rocks, but I kept getting up and running. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire and my legs turned numb. About 300 yards from the clearing, I dove into a patch of dense brush and curled into myself, shaking. The clock read 3:35. I watched the second hand move. 3:36. 3:37. At exactly 3:38. Nothing happened. Silence. No footsteps. No screams. I stayed hidden in those bushes until dawn. When the first rays of sunlight finally broke through the trees, the forest started to look like an ordinary forest again. I forced myself to return to the clearing. My truck was still there. The cabin was empty. But when I walked up to the driver's door, I saw the thing that made me hand in my resignation later that same day. Scratched into the metal where I'd heard the scraping sound were the words, "See you on your next run." I called a tow truck using the satellite phone from my emergency kit. I never went back to Utah again. And even now, I still can't sleep whenever the clock gets close to 3:30 in the morning. Because I realized something. That delivery form listed the date of death. But it never listed the year. Thanks for listening to the first story all the way through. If you're feeling that little chill crawling down your spine right now, then you and I are on the same wavelength. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. Seriously, I always love reading where people are hearing these stories and what kind of atmosphere they're in. It really helps support the channel. And if you enjoy what I do, don't forget to leave a like. Now take a deep breath. We're moving on to the second story. And trust me, it's just as disturbing. There's a special kind of exhaustion. It's the point where your brain starts playing tricks on you, smearing the line between reality and dreaming with your eyes open. Every trucker knows that state. Shadows on the roadside start looking like people. The headlights of oncoming cars resemble the eyes of massive animals staring through the dark. But what happened to me in the Appalachians wasn't a hallucination born from fatigue. It was real. I was hauling heavy spools of copper cable along with equipment meant to repair an abandoned communications tower. The client was some private telecom company. The site was buried deep in the mountains of West Virginia. The road leading there wasn't just bad, it barely existed at all. It was an old logging trail carved through the forest and washed apart by years of rain. It was 3:10 in the morning. The fog that night was so thick it felt solid. It clung to the windshield like wet fabric, and my headlights slammed into a wall of white. I crawled forward at walking speed, constantly checking the GPS as it repeatedly lost signal. Finally, the navigator announced that I had arrived. Ahead of me, through the curtain of fog, the outline of a tall steel structure slowly emerged into view. The tower. Beside it stood a small concrete utility building. Because of the steep incline and deep mud, I couldn't get the freightliner close enough to unload. I had to leave the rig about 100 yards from the tower. I set the parking brake, threw on my heavy reflective work jacket, mountain nights cut straight through your bones, grabbed the paperwork and my flashlight, then climbed down from the cab. I needed to find the visitor log inside the utility shack, leave the delivery forms there, and record my arrival time so the installation crew would know the cargo had made it on site by morning. I walked through thick mud, every step making a wet-sucking sound. The fog swallowed every other noise. No birds. No wind. Just my breathing and the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. The metal door to the shack stood slightly open. A damp smell drifted out from inside, moisture, ozone, and old paper. I pushed the door. It creaked inward. The room was cramped. Shelves packed with spare parts lined the walls. Dust-covered monitors sat dead and forgotten in the corners. In the middle of the room stood a small steel desk. On top of it lay a thick logbook with a worn leather cover. A pen rested beside it. I stepped closer, shook rainwater from my jacket, and shined my flashlight onto the pages. The logbook was old. Some entries were months old. Others dated back years. I flipped to the last completed page so I could write down my information. I lowered the pen toward the paper. And froze. The final line, directly above the empty space, had already been filled in. The ink was fresh. Still wet. Today's date. Time, 3:05 a.m. Visitor name, Arthur Brody. My name. I stared at the letters without moving. It was my name, but not my handwriting. I'm right-handed, and my handwriting is small and cramped. These letters were broad and slanted sharply to the left, the kind of writing you'd expect from a left-handed person. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe dispatch, but there was nobody here. And the ink. The ink was fresh. Someone had written it 5 minutes ago. Then I felt a draft. The air inside the shack turned ice cold. Slowly, I lifted my head and aimed the flashlight toward the far corner of the room where several tall server cabinets stood in shadow. Someone was sitting there. A person sat motionless in an old office chair between the cabinets, hands folded quietly in their lap. My heartbeat climbed into my throat. Instinctively, I stepped backward. Hey! My voice cracked, sounding weak and pathetic in the silence. I'm with the delivery company. I brought the cable. The figure didn't answer. Didn't even move. The flashlight beam slid across his boots first. Work boots. Exactly like mine. Then the light moved higher. The jacket. A thick bright yellow reflective jacket with silver safety stripes. On the left side of the chest was the embroidered logo of my trucking company. And beneath it, a name patch. A. Brody. It was my spare jacket, the one I always kept hanging behind the sleeper in my cab. Terror locked every muscle in my body. I couldn't breathe. Slowly, fighting against every instinct screaming at me not to look, I raised the flashlight toward his face. I expected a mask. Expected some lunatic drifter hiding in the mountains. But what I saw shattered my sense of reality. It was my face. The same eyes. The same scar beneath the chin from a childhood accident. The same nose. But older. Much older. Deep wrinkles carved through the forehead and cheeks. The skin was gray, corpse-like. The eyes had sunk deep into dark hollows, yet somehow I could still feel them staring straight through me. The double slowly pulled his lips into a smile. Not a smile of happiness. A grimace of pure concentrated madness. Then he lifted his left hand. A ring of keys dangled from his fingers. My truck keys. The same keys I had left in the ignition. He shook them once. The metallic jingle echoed through the cramped shack. I don't remember turning around. Survival instinct ripped me free from the paralysis. I exploded through the doorway so fast my shoulder slammed into the frame hard enough to nearly rip the door off its hinges. I ran through the fog, slipping in mud. I fell, tearing my hands open on rocks, then scrambled back to my feet and kept running. The fog was so dense I couldn't even see my truck. I ran blind, following only the slope of the road. Behind me, I heard no footsteps. No screams. But I could feel him following me. I felt that stare pressing into my back. Then, at last, the chrome bumper of my rig emerged from the white haze. I sprinted to the driver's door and yanked the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. He had the keys. Panic swallowed me whole. I started pounding on the window with my fists. I ran around the truck, pulling on the passenger side handle, the storage compartments, trying to force open the hood. Everything was locked. I stood there alone in the mountains beside a sealed truck wrapped in fog. Then suddenly, the headlights exploded to life. High beams. Blinding white light tore through the mist and slammed into my eyes. I threw my arms over my face and stumbled backward. The engine roared awake. Someone had started the truck from inside. I looked through the windshield. There he was. My older duplicate sat behind the wheel in the dim green glow of the dashboard, staring down at me with both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. Then he shifted into gear. The truck lurched forward and began rolling straight toward me. I threw myself sideways into a muddy drainage ditch. The massive tires rolled past less than 3 feet from my face, spraying me with mud and freezing water. The rig slowly gathered speed as it disappeared down the logging road and vanished back into the fog. I lay there in the ditch, shaking from cold and shock. Alone. No truck. No radio. No way to call for help. Miles from civilization. I had no choice but to walk. I walked nearly 8 hours before I finally reached a highway and managed to hitch a ride. I called the police and my dispatcher. I told them I'd been attacked and that my truck had been stolen. I never mentioned the double. They would have locked me in a psychiatric hospital. The truck was found 2 days later. Abandoned on the shoulder of Interstate 64, nearly 100 miles from the tower site. It was completely intact. The cargo was untouched. The keys were lying on the driver's seat. But there were two things the police could never explain. First, the dashcam had been ripped out by the roots. And second, when I picked the truck up from the impound lot, I noticed something small on the dashboard. A strip of black electrical tape had been carefully stuck beneath the speedometer. I peeled it off. Scratched into the plastic underneath were the words, "Your time is running out faster than you think." I quit that company soon afterward. I moved to another state. But every time I look in the mirror now, I feel afraid. Afraid that one day I'll see that same smile staring back at me. Because every year, my face becomes a little more like the one I saw sitting in that dark utility shack deep in the Appalachians. People often think wilderness means emptiness. They think that if you drive far enough away from cities, there's nothing left except trees, rocks, and animals. But that isn't true. Emptiness doesn't exist. If a place is free of people, something else moves in to fill the space. Something patient. Something that knows how to wait. I learned that during a delivery run into the Yellowstone backcountry. It was a restricted forest sector accessible only with special permits. Winter had hit hard that year. Snowdrifts towered over 6 feet high, and the roads were cleared only for emergency vehicles and authorized transport. My assignment sounded simple, just unusual: deliver emergency rations and survival equipment to a remote emergency bunker cache. These hidden shelters were maintained for search and rescue teams and park rangers in case of extreme weather disasters. It was 2:45 in the morning. My Kenworth, fitted with heavy snow chains, crawled slowly through a narrow corridor carved between walls of snow. Black silhouettes of pine trees rose on both sides of the road. There was no moon. Fine icy snow drifted through the darkness. I was completely alone. The nearest town was 4 hours away. If the truck broke down out there, I'd freeze to death long before anyone reached me. The GPS chirped, signaling arrival. I stopped the truck. Ahead, illuminated by the headlights, stood a concrete structure half buried in the side of a hill. That was the cache bunker. A thick steel door. No windows. From the outside, it looked like an old military fallout shelter. I left the engine running so the cab wouldn't freeze over. Pulling my knit cap lower over my ears, I grabbed the paperwork and climbed down into the deep snow. The cold bit into my face immediately. Beside the bunker door was an electronic keypad lock. I pulled out my phone to check the access code dispatch was supposed to send me. No signal. I opened the cached messages instead. The route was there. The cargo manifest. Contact information. But the field labeled access code was blank. Dispatch had forgotten to include it. I cursed under my breath. Turning back without unloading meant losing money and getting fined. Sleeping out there until morning while hoping for a signal was dangerous in that kind of cold. I decided to try standard combinations. 1234. 1235. The park's founding year. Nothing. The keypad flashed red every time. Out of frustration and exhaustion, my fingers automatically typed in the number I used everywhere whenever I couldn't remember a password. My driver's license number. 9 digits I knew by heart. I pressed the final key. A loud electronic beep echoed through the snow. The keypad turned green. Inside the door, a heavy locking mechanism clanked open. I froze. The odds of the access code to a classified government bunker in the middle of nowhere matching my driver's license number were impossible. It couldn't happen. A chill crawled down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the freezing air outside. But the door was open. I just needed to unload the cargo and leave. I convinced myself it had to be some insane coincidence. A system error. I grabbed the handle, pulled the heavy steel door open, and stepped inside. Dim fluorescent lights flickered on overhead. The bunker was large, dry, and warm. Some kind of heating system hummed quietly in the background. Metal shelving lined the walls. But the shelves weren't empty. They weren't waiting for my delivery. They were already full. Packed with boxes. Hundreds of cardboard boxes of every size imaginable. Some looked brand new. Others were buried beneath thick layers of dust, their corners softened and frayed by age. I walked toward the nearest shelf. Every box had a shipping label attached. I bent down to read the closest one. Recipient, David Harris. My name. Shipping date, October 14, 2018. I stared at it, confused, then grabbed the box beside it. Recipient, David Harris. Shipping date, May 3, 2012. I started walking along the rows. My breathing quickened. The dates kept going backward. 2008. 2009. I reached the farthest corner of the bunker. There sat a small battered cardboard box. Recipient, David Harris. Shipping date, August 12, 1999. In 1999, I was 10 years old. I lived in another state. I didn't even know what trucking was back then. My hands began shaking. I pulled a pocket knife from my jacket and sliced through the tape on the 1999 box. Then I opened it. Inside was a blue plastic pencil case. My pencil case. The one with the Batman sticker on it that I lost in a neighborhood park when I was a kid. I remembered crying over it for days. Beside it lay my old school journal with the torn cover. I staggered backward, then rushed toward the box from 2012. I tore it open. Inside was a collar. A red leather dog collar with a metal tag that read, Buster. It belonged to my dog. The dog that had been hit by a car that year. We buried him wearing that collar. Someone had dug him up. The room started spinning. Nausea hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. This wasn't a storage bunker. It was a museum of my life. A museum of everything I had lost, forgotten, or had stolen from me. Someone had been watching me since childhood. Someone had been collecting pieces of my life and storing them here, deep in the wilderness at the edge of the world. And whoever it was had arranged this delivery. They gave me the route. They set my driver's license number as the password. They invited me here. Then suddenly, behind me, a deafening metallic slam. The bunker door had closed. I lunged toward it, stumbling over boxes. I slammed my shoulder into the steel, then pounded it with my fists. Locked. Completely locked. There was no interior handle. No emergency release. Nothing but smooth metal. I was trapped inside my own tomb. I started screaming, kicking the door, hammering against it with both fists, but the concrete walls swallowed every sound. Breathing hard, I turned and scanned the bunker. There had to be another way out. Ventilation. An emergency hatch. I ran along the walls, knocking boxes off shelves as I searched. My life exploded across the floor around me, old t-shirts, broken watches, photographs I thought had disappeared years ago. Then I spotted it. Near the ceiling at the far end of the bunker was a metal ventilation grate, large enough to crawl through. I dragged over 2 heavy crates, stacked them together, and climbed up. Pulling out my knife again, I started unscrewing the rusted bolts. They fought me the whole way. Rust crumbled into my eyes as I worked. Then I heard a sound outside. An engine. But not my diesel truck. A heavy SUV. It pulled up outside the bunker and shut off. A door slammed. Footsteps crunching through snow. Coming closer. I ripped out the final screw, tore the grate free, and pulled myself into the narrow ventilation shaft. The metal inside was freezing cold. I crawled forward, scraping skin from my elbows. Behind me, below, came the electronic chirp of the keypad lock. Then the bunker door creaked open. I froze inside the vent, terrified to even breathe. Through the thin metal walls, I could hear everything happening below. Someone entered the bunker. Slow. Heavy footsteps. The person walked calmly around the room. I could hear objects being picked up from the floor. Then a voice echoed through the bunker. Deep. Calm. Satisfied. Welcome home, David. I crawled faster, clenching my teeth to stop myself from screaming. The ventilation shaft finally led to an exterior grate on the backside of the hill. I kicked it out and tumbled into deep snow. I didn't run toward my truck. I knew he would hear me. Instead, I crawled through the snow toward the tree line, hiding behind the pines. From my hiding spot, I could see the front of the bunker. My truck was still there with the engine idling. Parked nearby was a black pickup truck with no license plates. Then a man stepped out of the bunker. Tall. Wearing a dark parka with the hood pulled low over his face. I couldn't see who he was. He walked to my truck, opened the driver's door, leaned inside, and removed the keys from the ignition. Then he shut the engine off. After that, he calmly walked back to the pickup, removed a gas can from the bed, returned to the bunker entrance, and started pouring something around the doorway. I didn't stay to see what happened next. I turned and disappeared deeper into the forest. Walking through Yellowstone at night in the dead of winter was basically suicide. But staying there felt worse. I walked until morning before I finally stumbled across a ranger patrol on snowmobiles. I was on the edge of hypothermia. I told the police about the bunker. They sent a team to investigate. When they came back, they said the bunker had completely burned out from the inside. No boxes. No belongings. Nothing except scorched concrete walls. My truck was still parked outside. The keys sat on the driver's seat. The black pickup was gone. The police concluded that exhaustion and hypothermia had caused some kind of mental breakdown. They closed the case. I never drove a truck again. I changed my name. Moved across the country. Now I work in an office and pay for everything in cash. But I know it isn't over. Because yesterday morning, when I stepped outside my new apartment, there was a small package sitting on the doormat. No return address. Inside was that same Batman pencil case. And a note. You forgot this during the move. It's still happening. And he's still out there somewhere. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope these stories made you glance over your shoulder at least once tonight. If they did, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, and what time it is there right now. Your comments and reactions genuinely help this channel survive and keep releasing new stories. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Be careful on those lonely night roads. And I'll see you again in the dark.